Welcome back after the break. Let's continue looking at river profiles. Now, a longitudinal profile is a side view of the river, like we've discussed, basically drawn on the previous diagrams. Now, this is the longitudinal profile. As you can see, is the river from the side. And in the previous couple of slides, we look at the upper, middle, and lower course. There is the source of the river, where the river originates, and where the mouth, where it eventually flows into the ocean. A cross profile, or the transverse profile, is a profile from the one side of the riverbed to the other side of the riverbed. And we did have a look at it when we look at erosion in the previous slides. Now, very importantly, when we look at this river profile, in our previous lesson, we discussed the type of runoff that we experienced. Now, we looked at surface runoff, as when the water is inside the riverbed on top of the surface, and we looked at groundwater flow, when the water infiltrates and flows towards the water table and eventually into base flow. Now, I just want to revise this because we need to remember, once we're going to discuss the longitudinal profile, the factors that influence this surface runoff and the groundwater is the following: the amount of rainfall. So we've mentioned if it rains more, the chances are much better that there's going to be surface runoff. The relief means the gradient. If there's going to be a steeper gradient, it means water will rather be on top of the surface than when it's infiltrating down to the water table. Then we look at the amount of plants, the amount of vegetation means if the area is going to be covered with a lot of vegetation, what's going to be promoted over here? The water is rather going to infiltrate. And last but not least, the type of rock. Now, in the previous lessons, we discussed permeability of rock. What did we say about permeable rock? Permeable rock allows water to infiltrate. Impermeable rock doesn't allow water to infiltrate. Now, obviously, this process influences this longitudinal profile. On our next slide, you can see a beautiful graded longitudinal profile. The reason why I'm saying it's graded, I'll explain, because it's concave in slope. It's a concave slope. And there's no nick points. The permanent base level of erosion. Now, permanent base level of erosion, what does it mean? It means the river can't erode any further than this point. And this is situated at the mouth. Now, let's just quickly, what we've learned so far in the lesson, we take this beautiful longitudinal profile, a graded profile, and we use it, and we quickly look at this longitudinal profile and we divide it into our three courses: upper, middle, and lower. And that's what we've learned in the previous couple of slides. Then obviously we look at our cross profiles. As you can see, that is your cross profile of your upper course. Why? Because of downwards erosion. This is your cross profile of the riverbed in the middle course because of lateral erosion and downwards erosion. And then if you look at the cross profile of the lower course of the riverbed, it's very wide. But very importantly, there's no erosion taking place, Gr12, only deposition. So all of that material that's been eroded over there and over there are being deposited over there. Now, a couple of characteristics that I still want to add over here. What do you think the volume of water is over here? Not much. The volume of water is going to increase in the middle course, and the volume of water is going to be greatest at the lower course. The velocity is going to be greatest at the upper course. Why is the velocity going to be greatest at the upper course? Simply because of the very steep gradient. The velocity is going to decrease in the middle course, and the river is going to be very sluggish in the lower course because of all the deposition taking place. Now, our next two topics that we're going to discuss is river capture and rejuvenation. Now, like I've mentioned to you before, if you look at the longitudinal profile, what is a longitudinal profile? It's a side profile of a river. It's this, from the source to the mouth. As you can see, beautifully concave in shape. Matrix, don't get confused between concave and convex. This is concave and this is convex. Okay. Now, changes can take place in this longitudinal profile of a river. It means it can change it from a concave shape to a different shape. So it means eventually the shape of this river can change because of the following: river capture and rejuvenation. Now, two processes can take place, and let's have a look at the first one. Now, rejuvenation, if we just quickly define the term, this is when a river gets more energy. Now, it rejuvenates itself. It means almost like getting a fresh breath of air. You rejuvenate yourself. Like, for instance, let's say, for instance, you drink a Red Bull. All of a sudden, you get more energy. Now, basically, it's when a river gets more energy. Almost say like drinking a Red Bull. But in this case, what happens with rejuvenation? It's when all of a sudden, if you think of it, if a river gets more energy, what do you think increases? Volume of water and velocity of water. And when we increase the volume of water and when we increase the velocity of water, what's going to happen? We're going to experience more downward erosion and we're going to experience more lateral erosion. Okay. Now, for instance, just look at the definition of rejuvenation. It's when a river gets more energy, it's said to be rejuvenated. It has more energy to erode, like I've mentioned, downwards and laterally, sideways. Now, what causes rejuvenation? We add more water to this river system. That happens. Or the gradient becomes steeper. We're going to look at a couple of factors that cause river rejuvenation. Another reason for rejuvenation is there's a drop in sea level. Like I've mentioned, if you look at the volume of water increases, it means the ability of erosion is more, capability of erosion is more, because more volume causes more erosion. A second reason is a drop in sea level. So basically, what happens, we got upliftment of land. Now, what happens over here, let's say for instance, this was our old longitudinal profile. And this was our source, and this was our mouth. Now, in red pen, this is where the ocean used to be. Now, in grade 10, you've learned about isostatic uplift. But we're just going to concentrate on upliftment of land. Basically, what happens because of pressure on the mantle, we're experiencing an uplift of land. So this is what the river used to look like. Beautiful, graded, longitudinal profile. But all of a sudden, we experience upliftment of land. So the river, longitudinal profile of the river changed from that to that. So this was where the sea used to be at the source of the river. But now the source of the river is going to be there. So what do we call this? Like I've mentioned, where the ocean is, where the mouth is permanent base level of erosion. The river can't erode any further where the mouth is, where the sea is. But now all of a sudden, there was an upliftment of land. Pay attention over here. The mouth used to be here, but there's an upliftment. So what happens? The sea level has dropped. So now the mouth is situated over here. So what was created over here? A nick point. And what do we call this nick point? We say it's temporary base level of erosion. Now, all of a sudden, this beautiful concave longitudinal profile of a river is not graded anymore, but is ungraded because of the upliftment of land. Or sometimes what happens, if you look at our first point, we experience an increased amount of water, so it's going to increase the amount of erosion, and erosional processes taking place laterally and vertically. Now, there's just a couple of diagrams showing you an oblique diagram of rejuvenation. Now, as you can see, the upper course, there's the river flowing in the upper course. We already know it's a very steep riverbed profile. It's downwards erosion taking place. Now, with the increase of water, what did we say? There's going to be more erosion capabilities. And as you can see, there's the river after rejuvenation, cutting even deeper into the river valley. So, as you can see, the river has been rejuvenated. What's the reason for it? Increase of volume of water and velocity of water, and might be because of upliftment of land. Now, as you can see, what happens in the middle course? Now, as far as we know, what happens in the middle course with a longitudinal profile? We have lateral erosion. Why? Because other tributaries starts joining this river, the volume increases, and there's more erosion. And it's not as steep. That's the reason why we experience the lateral erosion. And we still got downwards erosion. But what happens with rejuvenation? Now, this was the river before rejuvenation. After rejuvenation, when the water level increases, there's going to be more lateral erosion, and it cuts even deeper. And what's been created? A valley within a valley. So, if I can just quickly wipe this out over here. If you look at it, this used to be the middle course over here. Now, because of the velocity of water that increases and the volume of water increases, it even creates more downward erosion. And as you can see, it's a valley inside a valley that's been formed. Okay, in the lower course, now we already discussed it. Now keep in mind, there's usually deposition taking place, but due to the upliftment of land, steeper gradient, and because of the volume of water, there's more erosion taking place and lateral erosion taking place, and that's the reason we can say that a valley is forming inside a valley. Now, in the lower course, we get step terraces that are forming. Now, because of the floodplain that develops, if you look at the river from the side, now this is the lower course. Now, this used to be the old floodplain. It means when the river is in flood during rainy season, what happens? The water level rises. And then just before that, this was the second oldest floodplain. But with rejuvenation, there was an increase of water and an increase the velocity of water and erosion capabilities. What happens? The river eroded even further laterally and vertically, creating these step terraces for the floodplain. Now, before rejuvenation took place, this was the normal river during dry season. What happens when rainy season happens? Over there, the water level rises up to there where the floodplain is. But now, after rejuvenation, because of the volume that was increased in the river, the floodplain is situated over here now, and situated over here on the outer banks, and the river is much deeper as well. Now, like I've mentioned to you before, when a river is flowing from its source to its mouth and it doesn't experience any rejuvenation. We say it's a graded profile. Now, a graded profile, like I've drawn to you before, is a beautiful concave slope, longitudinal profile. The permanent base level of erosion is sea level. It can't erode any further. And a graded profile is a very smooth concave river profile. Now with an ungraded profile, like I've shown you what happens with rejuvenation, we have a nick point that develops and means our longitudinal profile is not really smooth anymore. Now for instance, this is a very good example of an ungraded profile, nick points that developed. Now these nick points might be waterfalls or rapids because of the upliftment of land that's being experienced and because of volume of water that increased. Please stay with me, be right back after the break.